Jesse, you were once a Republican, but on the last elections you supported Democrats. What made you change your perspective? And do you agree with the policies of the current Democratic Party?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I grew up in Republican politics, and that was kind of what I had known. My mom was a very amazing woman who got involved in politics also when she was younger, and was very involved in the Young Republicans and was very involved on a national level with them. In fact, got elected as the secretary for the Young Republicans on the national basis. Was then elected as co-chair of the National Young Republicans, and the chair ended up passing away. And so my mom was the first female chair of the Young Republicans, breaking that glass ceiling. And I believe that was in 1975. And from that, because she was involved in these things, I sometimes got to accompany her to different places. I remember a trip to Nevada to look at facilities and meeting the governor and the senator, U.S. senator from there, going to conferences in D.C., getting to meet Ronald Reagan, going to a conference in Indianapolis, again, getting an opportunity to meet Reagan and actually spend some time talking to him, which is pretty heady for a 13-year-old kid, seeing all these politicians and being kind of involved in the political process, going with my mom to parades, handing out literature, door knocking, receiving training when I was in college from the Republican Party on how to motivate, activate, and canvas. So when I was young, I was very much politically involved. And then after law school and getting married, moving to California, I was not politically active in any sense. I was more focused on dealing with my job and then, of course, dealing with kids and dealing with work and family life. And I really had no time for politics. I remained a registered Republican for a very long period of time. In fact, until 2 years ago, I was registered as a Republican. But I had also started not liking the Republican Party in a lot of things as they began their move away from small government yeah, power to the people platform to let's own the libs and let's crack down on folks. And I've kind of equated it to seeing the small government, get government out of your lives, uh, party of law and order to becoming a party of lawlessness and not only not getting the government out of your lives, but making the government tell you what you can and can't do. It's the absolute opposite of personal freedoms that they had avowed to do. So I had drifted for a long time away. I was not an active member of the Republican Party. I just basically kept my registration out of a sense of respect and honor to my mom, who had been such an incredible advocate in breaking glass ceilings and other things. But over the last 30 years, I had never donated to a Republican candidate. I've never donated to the Republican Party. And there was a part of me as I became much more disenchanted with them. It was kind of a, hey, I'm registered, so they keep sending me all this stuff. So they're spending money on me, trying to get stuff. I'll just let them keep doing that. And then when I got into the voting booth, it was not for me a sense of what party this person is. It was what is this person advocating for, and how are they going to be able to accomplish that? But then starting in 2016 with that campaign, and then the first Trump administration, and the negative things that were going on, and especially within, the attacks on trans folks, the wanting to kick us out of the military. And I was deathly afraid of the first Trump administration. I remember, and it was just yesterday or today, a memory came up on my Facebook where I was warning trans people back in 2016 that they needed to get their passports updated because the fact that Mike Pompeo was going to be the Secretary of State, I knew that they were going to attempt to screw with the passport related things. Fortunately, they didn't at that time, but I could see that it was not going well for the trans community, especially with what was going on, especially within the religious right Republican groups. And I was warning about some of these things from the very beginning of my transition because I saw things like the Family Research Council, the same month that I, was full time at my work, they came out with a, 56 or so page treatise about responding to the transgender movement. And in that, they specifically, target sports and kids and documentation, medical insurance. And it was basically an outline of how to respond to the trans issues by doing everything that they're doing right now with all of the stripping away of rights and that they've tried to do legislatively. And so, yes, I backed away from that. And then 2 years ago, when I moved back to Nebraska, I got my driver's license and the opportunity to register to vote. There was no question in my mind that I was not going to register as a Republican, even though I had a history in the state of Nebraska. When I was in college, I was the legislative aide for a Republican state senator. I interned for the Republican governor. I interned for the Nebraska Republican Party. I had been hired and worked for the Republican congresswoman from the 3rd Congressional District. So my whole knowledge of folks here in Nebraska, as far as politics was concerned, was almost knowing strictly Republicans. And so I didn't really know any Democrats when I had first started coming back. And that was, 2 years ago when they started the first round of anti-transgender legislation. And I came back because I had seen what had been transpiring around the country in 2015. I'm sorry, in 2022, 23. God, it's all really good. That would have been in 2022. There were a lot of anti-trans laws. And so at the end of the year, I had decided that I was going to get involved somehow and go to another state because living in California, it's the trans rights things are not really under attack there as much as they are in all these red states. And so I had been seeing this and I was like, okay, I want to lend my voice and take on some of these laws. I had no idea I was going to be coming back to my home state of Nebraska on that because we've always been a little bit different as a state, a little more progressive and not as uh, fractionalized as a lot of states are because we have a unique legislative system in Nebraska. You don't run on political parties here. You are a member of a party, but the legislative races are all nonpartisan. You don't have a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate, although frequently you end up with that. But there is no primaries. It's only the top two vote getters. So we've had districts where you have two Republicans or two Democrats running against each other in the general election. And so it's always not been as mean of a state, I guess, as some of the other states. But I saw that changing. And then I was contacted by an elderly gentleman that I knew from when I was a kid and younger, who had been our State Farm insurance agent in my small hometown, who he and his wife now live in Lincoln. And they reached out to me because this bill involving the trans sports participation had been introduced, and he was wanting to know some questions about it because he wanted to go testify against it because as a coach, he knew it was a bunch of BS. And I was like, wait a second, they're doing this in Nebraska? And so I made plans to come back. I thank God my brother lived in Lincoln and let me stay with him. And so I spent time going to the legislature, trying to talk to some of the legislators about the issue, and then um, uh, managed to get in to testify against the bill, which was extremely difficult because they limited the testimony to 4 hours, and literally hundreds of people were turned away from opposing the legislation because they put this arbitrary time limit on it. But I did manage to get in, and then I got asked to come back and testify against the healthcare restriction bill that was also pending. And I began to meet a lot of the folks here. I met a lot of the Democratic legislators. I got to meet a lot of parents of trans kids who were, deathly afraid for their kids by what was going on. And so then by the end of the legislative session, when through means that are not really something that had been done in the past, they managed to get that restriction passed. And they did it by combining it with an abortion bill. And so Nebraska was the first state to restrict abortions and gender affirming healthcare in a single bill. And when that decision was made, I told the kids and the families of uh, trans kids that I was going to come back to Nebraska and I was going to fight for them. So obviously, when I got here, I'm not registering as a Republican because they are the ones piling on all of this. I had gotten to know the Democratic folks, and so I immediately registered as a Democrat. And shortly thereafter, I was asked to become the vice chair of the Stonewall Caucus, which is the queer group. I ended up attending the county party central committee meetings and ended up getting on the county central committee, and then went to the state meetings and ended up getting um, elected to the state central committee, and then continued to get involved. Was last year when we had our county convention, I ran as a delegate to the state convention and was elected to that. And then I ran, I had a couple of races at the state convention. One of them was for the position of elector. the way the Electoral College works is you have the votes in the state. Now, most states are winner take all, so whoever wins the popular vote for that state wins all of the Electoral College votes for that state. Nebraska is different. We separate ours out by congressional district, and so if a candidate wins the congressional district, that electoral vote goes to that candidate, and in Nebraska, we have now three times the second congressional district, of which I'm a member, um, has gone with somebody who did not win the statewide race, and so we have given an electoral vote three times to the Democratic candidate, and so I really wanted to be the elector for the second congressional district, and in fact, on the first ballot that we had at the convention, I was the leading vote getter, but because there were three candidates, they dropped off the lower candidate, and then I lost in the next round, but. I thought, how cool would it be to have a trans woman, sign the Electoral College certificate for the state of Nebraska against, the person who's coming after us. But I did manage to get the most votes from our congressional district for a delegate to the national convention. And so I ended up going to Chicago and being involved in all of that, which was just an incredible experience. And I've had nothing but, really pretty good interactions with folks in the state. There have been some things that, I kind of have to question is were they truly fair on a couple of things? But politics isn't about getting your way all the time. It's like trying to change minds and do things to build a coalition and to get done what you can do. And sometimes, you don't come out on top, but we still continue to fight. So the values of the Democratic Party align much more with the values that I have. And that's been that way for a while. I probably could have registered as a Democrat years ago and not had any issue with that. But I just kind of liked that I was having them send stuff and spend money on me and think that the Republicans think that they had, a vote on me when they really didn't. But it's been so much fun getting back into politics because it was something I had done as a youth. I had thought about running for office at some point, and I've still given some consideration to it. But at this point, is in my age and the fact that I am trans and the fact that people would dig up all kinds of things and frankly it would be a waste for me, I think, in some respects to run. Now it would depend on the district or the office or whatever, but Nebraska is an incredibly conservative red state, and even though um, they vote against their self-interest so many times. It stays that way. It just seems like once you put an R by your name, that's it, and you have to do everything that they say, and they will never even consider a Democrat, depending on their level, which is a change from when I was growing up. Because when I was a kid, we had alternated between Republican and Democratic governors here. We did have Democratic state senator or U.S. senators. I mean, Bob Kerrey was governor from Nebraska, and he was, far from being a right winger. Although he was not a far left liberal, he definitely was a Democrat. And we had that in this state. We had some at least cohesiveness between the parties and agreements, and we would elect folks. It hasn't been that way in 25 years here. It's like pretty much it's been a long time since there has been a statewide elected Democrat. And that's a little frustrating. But it's been so much fun getting back into it and trying to change people's minds and having conversations with folks that I've known for a long time and trying to get them to see that the Republican Party today is not the Republican Party. It literally has morphed into something that is totally foreign to what I thought were a lot of the core Republican ideals and principles. And I hate even calling it the Republican Party now because they're doing things that are the antithesis of what I thought Republicans were. It's a MAGA party now, as far as I'm concerned, and that is not. They are not Republicans. They are doing things that I would think most Republicans, at least the ones, the Republicanism that I grew up in, that I understood, this is not it. And I don't know why more of them are not standing up and saying this goes against my traditional values that I've held for my life. It's like they are willing to sell their souls and sell their respect and sell their their belief system in exchange for power. And to what end? Um, I look at what has happened in this country, pretty much over my lifetime. I remember working in Washington, D.C. and listening to conservative Republicans talking about changing the tax code, making it more fair. The the trickle down theory that was supposed to happen, that I was there during all of that time. I saw David Stockman speak. I saw these folks talking about the benefits that we were going to get from changing the tax code. And yet here we are years down the road, the middle class has been decimated. Uh, the poor are not being given the opportunities to expand their wealth and grow. And in fact, we've seen the largest transfer of wealth from the lower 80% of America to the upper 1 and 2% of America. And the amount of growth of wealth of the richest in this country, that gap is so much bigger than it ever was, and it's creating this dual class citizenship or dual class world, and they're now talking about giving even more tax breaks to the people who are billionaires. And literally have over the last 4 years, many of them have doubled their billionaire wealth. To what end? What good are they doing? What are they giving back to the community? It's like, I certainly don't see any Donald J. Trump cancer treatment centers or Elon Musk, family healthcare centers. They're not taking that wealth and putting it to helping society. They're taking that wealth and using it to buy the political system to give themselves even more wealth. And as somebody who is, comfortably in the middle class, I look at this with such disdain and anger about they're in the process of talking about cutting trillions of dollars from the waste, fraud, and abuse that's taking place. And they're looking at doing it by restricting access to health care, taking away veterans' benefits, taking away Social Security benefits, taking away Medicare and Medicaid for folks, the social safety nets. They're taking that money away so that they can increase the billions that they're getting. And that why we're not having more people rising up and talking about that issue is truly surprising, because they're talking about, oh, we're spending more than we make. We've got to get this deficit down. And yet the very bill that they're proposing, the spending plan that they're proposing, does nothing really to cut down the deficit. It basically says they're going to extend it. They've asked to raise the debt ceiling far beyond what it has been, also that they can fund additional tax breaks to the ultra wealthy so they can get another yacht, buy another island. Whatever it is that they're doing in relationship to that, it's not going back into and helping those who need it the most. And so that's probably the big reason why I have stepped back away from ever being a Republican, because I've seen the damage that it's done. I've seen the lies that I was told in my youth not coming true for folks. And it's been it was a pretty easy decision to change that party affiliation. Do I agree with everything that the Democrats do? Of course not. I am a very conservative individual for the most part, and the fact that I am in the Democratic Party, which does have a lot of ultra liberals, but it also has conservative folks, and I just felt that I would much rather be a conservative Democrat than a hypocritical Republican.
Yes, a couple of thoughts about the challenges that Sarah McBride are facing right now. As we know, she is the only openly trans woman in the House of Representatives.
She is facing tremendous challenges because basically her coworkers are creating a hostile workplace. It is so funny. We have a U.S. Supreme Court decision that says it is illegal to discriminate against trans people in the workplace. That is a federal law. It applies. But because it's in Congress, this is a political question. And so I don't think that how Congress treats its members is something that is subject to, judicial review, but it certainly is something that is subjected to, individuals' personal views and disdain. She's in a no-win position because if she overtly fights back and starts taking all this stuff on directly, then she is drawing resources away from herself that are needed for her to do her job. She's focusing on she would focus on herself and not her constituents, and so her response to the initial banning her from using female facilities within the House portion of the Capitol, because the Speaker's orders can't affect the Senate side because they're two separate bodies with two separate rules. Her response was, I wasn't planning on doing that anyway. And, there's not a lot of gender neutral facilities in the actual physical Capitol building itself. Now, in some of the other areas there are, but, I have to respect her for not, pushing that as a fight to get into. However, the misgendering of her by members of Congress is just politically distasteful. And I'm glad that she caught on to the tactic of kind of responding on some of these. The other day in a hearing, the Republican chair, when it became time for Congresswoman McBride's opportunity to ask questions, and if you know how Congress works, you have the majority person who is the chair, and then the vice chair is the senior other party official. So in a Republican Congress, the chair of the committee is a Republican, the vice chair will be a Democrat. And so it starts on seniority. And then, so if the people who are on the outside ends of the dais are the youngest, newest members of the committee, and they're always the last people who get to ask questions. So the questioning goes down. So this was a hearing where everybody had gone through And the last person called on to be able to ask questions was Senator McBride. And the Republican chair says, and now the congressman from Virginia, Mr. McBride. And I love it. She didn't miss a beat, and she responded with, "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman," or "Thank you, Madam Chair." Uh, and I think she got that from a gal who testified in front of the Wyoming House a couple of weeks ago, and it was on like a free speech bill or something like that, and uh, the chair, said, "Well, we recognize Ms. Whatever from, and she goes, 'Thank you, Madam Chair,' and he goes, it's sir, it's not Madam," and she goes, "Oh, well, I thought you all just voted to say we have free speech on this and we can do whatever we want to on that," and he got all flustered. And so Sarah used that same tactic against the chair there, and then she got interrupted by the vice chair, the senior member of the on the Democratic side, who said, "What did you say? How did you?" And talking to the chairman and saying, "How did you address this duly elected member of Congress from the state of Delaware? That's ridiculous." He goes, I said, "Mr. McBride," and he goes, "And that is wrong." He goes, "Well, we're going on with," the chair goes, "We're going on with the hearing." He goes, "Not with me, you're not." And he goes, the chair then gavelled out that effectively what happened, she got silenced. She was not allowed to be able to ask questions, and that is wrong. She is a duly elected member of Congress. She is duly elected by the folks in Delaware. She was fully elected knowing that she was a trans woman. She had been a state senator there. And so for them to go around and deliberately misgender, deliberately uh, go out of their way to demean her is just so wrong. And it's so petty. And yet again, Congresswoman Nancy Mace from South Carolina will, she went on another Twitter trend, with the using the trans insult against folks. She's done it in Congress, and it just is such pettiness. It really and truly is pettiness. And I've had arguments with some folks on Twitter about that. I'm like, it's Congresswoman McBride. She legally and lawfully changed her gender, and it's realistically they're just creating a hostile workplace that this would not be tolerated in the private sector. It's illegal, and I kind of feel for her in some ways. I've testified in front of the Nebraska legislature. I last year I testified on a bill that would replace school counselors with chaplains, and the committee chair, who's an old Republican bigot, after everyone was done with their testimony, it was any questions for Ms. Smith, any questions for Mr. Johnson, and when it came to the end of mine, it was any questions for Jesse McGrath. He could not use my pronoun.
So
Uh,
pathetic.
it's like, oh, okay, great. Oh, so you're laughing in your mind that you did that, and I think I may testify tomorrow in that same committee with that same chair, and I'm almost tempted to start out by thank you, Paul Erdman, for giving me the opportunity. Well, it's Senator Erdman. I said, well, wait a second. I didn't think you like using honorifics because last time I testified in front of you didn't call me Ms. McGrath. You used my first name. I thought that that's what you want to do. I'm tempted to do that, and I may very well do that. But she is in a really difficult situation. I applaud her for how she has been responding. And she did do a press conference the other day where, basically saying why they're focusing on this issue instead of doing things to represent their constituents. It's just petty and small, and it doesn't affect anything, and they're doing it to distract from the negative, bad things that they are doing.
Exactly. I struggle living in a male body, and I knew from the beginning of my transition that I need sex reassignment surgery, or bottom surgery in other words. I have started a fundraiser to cover the costs related to this surgery. Total amount needed $14,750 US. I will leave the link to the fundraiser for this surgery in the description under this video. I would be incredibly grateful for any help, whether through donations or sharing my fundraiser on your social media. Jesse, at the end of each interview, I ask my guests about hope. Considering the current political climate, I guess it's very important not to lose hope.
It's incredibly important to not lose hope. And it's incredibly important that we continue to speak with folks and let them know what we're going through as a community. I am incredibly buoyed by my interactions with people who are not from the community who show support for us and who do things to help normalize our being trans and such. And for example, on Wednesday of this week, I was asked to join with Lenora Gay, who is the mayor of Lincoln and the longest serving teacher in the Lincoln public school system, to talk at an assembly about our jobs and our careers and how important it is to get young girls interested in looking at professions that maybe they would not have. And so to be asked to be a part of this women's group talking to young girls, it just truly is something that I think does give hope to the community, that people do see us out here and they see us for who we are. And getting out and getting a chance to talk to folks and sharing our trans joy, and so that people can see what it's like to be able to live as yourself and to live free, and to give other trans people that same hope. And it's hard in this environment, I've got to say, and I think I have probably stepped back a little bit from sharing as much as I kind of did in the past. And part of that is because I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I love the fact that it allows us to be able to communicate with each other, to get our ideas across. And I hate it because of the manipulative way in which it is being used to basically attack our community and to take information that we put out there, and then have it used as a bludgeon against us. Seeing the social media with Congresswoman McBride, where they frequently dig up old pictures of her and use her dead name and misgender her. Now, a lot of us in the trans community, we have these pictures out there because we show the physical transformation that we go through to be who we are. And I know some people are deathly afraid of their pre-transition photos and early transition photos and things like that. And I'm not. It's just like it's a part of my story. It's a part of who I am. I have this background. I am proud of who I was, and I'm proud of what I accomplished. And I am extremely proud to show how I have gone from who that person was to who the person I am today is. But yet people want to use that as a weapon against us. So that's part of the reason I hate social media. I also hate that there are groups who have gotten involved in that and create bot farms that allegedly spread information when in fact it's actually disinformation. They're using logarithms to continually feed negative information to folks. And there's a part of me that I don't want to feed that machine. I don't want these companies making money off of my content that I give them for free and then take that money that they make to attack my community. So how do we spread our trans joy? How do we spread the things that we're doing that is noteworthy and worth, being seen? Um, for me, it's just such a difficult thing, and I try to do what I can to uplift people, and I do go out and I speak to different groups, and I try to, you know, get that joy across and get that hope across. There is, for me right now, I'm hoping that Amy Coney Barrett is a real human being with real legal principles who will look at the facts and evidence in this case and come to the conclusion that we can't be legislated against just simply because, you know, somebody is distressed that trans people exist. And that is basically, when you come down to it, almost none of these restrictions can be legally upheld based on actual facts and actual evidence, which is why they constantly get overturned in court, because these are judges who spend days in hearings from experts. It's one thing, to have a two-paragraph statement on X or Facebook, and somebody responds with, a three-line, thing, or a link to a study that is incredibly bogus. And if it is subjected to actual examination and cross-examination under rules of evidence, it totally gets destroyed. But you don't get that on social media. You don't get that interaction. You don't have the ability to listen to so many different sides and then come to a legal determination based on the facts and the law. That's not what's been happening. It's been a huge outpouring of money, effort, organization to malign the trans community because, frankly, for a lot of folks, it comes down to their religious interpretation and views of things, and they just don't want trans people to exist. The biggest example of this is the last presidential election. Yes, the Democratic Party supports trans people. That was not their platform that they were running on. They were not running on a pro-trans deal. In fact, on the national ticket between Harris and Governor Walz, there were probably 3 times in the course of the campaign where they were asked about those issues. And Harris did not do a particularly good job in talking about the trans issues, because she basically said, I will uphold the law, and that allowed Trump to do the whole she is for they, them, I am for you. The case that she was talking about was decided under the previous Trump administration, and there was a court ruling that required, under the Eighth Amendment, that the government provide gender-affirming care to people who are incarcerated, because that's the law. You have to give medical care to the people that you imprison. And she just said that she would follow the law. And that opened the door. And she didn't really explain why she had this position. And it resulted in a $215 million expenditure of anti-trans ads that misrepresented things. Over the course of the last 10 years, there have been billions of dollars spent creating bogus organizations to create anti-trans studies, to testify against trans folks and in favor of laws restricting us, funding studies that are the conclusion is drawn, and then they find evidence to support the conclusion that they want to obtain. There's a lot of talk about the social contagion and the rapid onset gender dysphoria. And that entire field was created not from talking to trans people or people who care for trans people. It was done by talking to parents of trans kids who didn't want their kids to be trans. And so their kids never told them about being trans. And when they finally did, it seems like it came out of nowhere, when in fact they had been thinking and looking at these probably for a couple of years in most cases. And so they wanted to create this. So they interviewed the folks who were going to say that this is an issue. Never talking to trans people, never talking to providers of trans-related healthcare to come up with a theory, published a paper in relationship to it, which was then subsequently had to be taken down. And then when it was republished, it was done so with corrections that basically say this is bogus. So you have people spending billions of dollars to attack a small marginalized community. And so it does give me hope when I see people fighting back on this, and know the community needs to know that we have a lot of folks who are really smart, who know what they're doing, who are trying to fight this. Now, are we ultimately going to be successful? That's what we all have to hope for, because if it literally is them wanting to remove a demographic from society that they just simply find offensive to them on whatever personal level basis that it is, be it religious or and I find it absolutely funny that they keep trying to find ways to define woman or man, and every definition that they try to come up with does not include everyone who is a woman or a man, because it really is extremely difficult to be able to define those in a legal way that would allow the restriction of us, because it's just not black and white. And so every time I have somebody who makes the argument about gamete size or what your chromosomes are, I always come back with, so what? What is the necessity to define it in a way that eliminates trans people's existence? That's all you're trying to do. You're not trying to define it for something. You're trying to find a definition that makes it illegal to be trans. And I say, so what? We exist. So you're all going to have to come up with ways that allow us to participate in society freely without discrimination and restrictions. You're trying to define it this way. Why? And why can't you let people just be? To me, it's just so frustrating. I'm getting in these arguments. I go, what is the compelling state interest in forcing a trans woman to identify as male? What is that compelling state interest? Because it can't be because you think trans people are icky. It can't be because you think God didn't make a mistake. It can't be because, there's only two sexes because that's what the Bible says, or that's generally what biology says. Just generally doesn't cut it. You have to have a compelling state interest, and there's no less restrictive means in doing it, and they can't come up with anything to satisfy that reality. And so I'm just going back now and saying, the reason you're doing this is you don't like trans people, you don't want us to exist, we do, and you just want to deny us our legal rights. And so what if we exist? It doesn't affect you in any way. The fact that I identify as a woman and I use the ladies' room at the airports when I travel, when I go through here, it doesn't affect anybody. I go into a cubicle by myself, just like everybody else. And so that does give me hope. And the fact that there are so many great legal minds who are out there fighting for us. I'm in the process of having to make, decisions right now for my life. I literally don't know where I'm going to be living and what I'm going to be doing. I'm at the end of my career at the DA's office. I've been there for 37 years. At the end of the year, I am working for free because my pension is going to be equal to what my salary is. And so it doesn't make sense to just continue to work when I could be doing that. And I have been asked to go to work for one of the legal uh, groups that are fighting for our rights, and I'm considering doing that. I've in negotiations with a studio in relationship to a television series, and so I may be doing that. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. But I do know that I am not going to shut up. I am not going to say that I am not trans. I am not going to let people get away with making misrepresentations about these issues. And I'm trying to find out how I can have an even bigger voice and how I can more directly get involved in the fight on this. I've become a political activist in a way that I never thought ever would, and getting out there, showing the joy that happens when we're able to transition, showing the joy of our lives. It's just something that I think, as trans people, it's something special that we have. I have met so many incredibly impressive trans people over the course of the last 10 years and seeing how they are just able to express themselves in ways that are truly inspiring and being able to go from depths to heights and being able to fight back. Um, that is just something that I think we can't get enough of. And the problem we have is spreading that joy and spreading that optimism because if you look at news media, they're talking about the trans issues. It's generally three or four or two or three or five or six cis people discussing about what to do about trans people and not having any trans people involved in that conversation. And that is just so wrong. I mean, how, it's like having a group of five wolves, having a discussion about what's for dinner of the flock of sheep over there, and not even allowing a sheep to say, hey, maybe you want some pork tonight. It literally is we are excluded even from the discussions most of the time. And so we've got to start seeing what we can do to get those positive stories out there, to get that positivity, to give that sense of hope. And by the same token, I am also not turning a blind eye to what is going on in relationship to things. And it's sad that, here I am at a point in my career. I have the district attorney of LA asking me to do a very important project on an issue that affects a whole bunch of people. But at the same time, I'm having to look with, keep my head on a swivel, thinking, is it going to come to a time where I have to leave my country because I conceivably could be criminalized just for existing? When you look at laws like now have been introduced in Texas, calling it gender identity fraud for a trans people to be just expressing who they are, that is truly frightening and truly scary. If you throw in, the current administration's decision that trans people don't exist, throw in with that these criminalization attempts, the requiring trans people, if they are convicted of a crime, to serve it in a prison or jail that is the opposite of their lived gender. That is something that's truly frightening. And I can see why the anxiety level of the trans community has just gone through the roof. I mean, even me, who I've really not had any issues in my transition. I've not felt fear on things because I've not seen myself as, a person who somebody should be frightened of or whatever. I am seeing it now where I have not had that before. And that negativity is empowering folks who don't like us. They hate it when we laugh at them, and they hate it when we continue to show our joy. And I'm going to continue to have them hating me because I'm going to continue to do that. I am going to continue to try to be a beacon, shining my light out there so that people can see that we are not a community that is to be feared. We are a community that actually has some very amazing things to share with the country. Uh, but it's really hard when they can focus on one or two, negative images, amplify those, run that through their mill that will then repost that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times, and has that negative stuff. If there were some way, I wish I could just like get equal time and equal access for all these negative things to shine the light on positive folks, shine the light on those airline pilots who get us to our destinations, shine the light on the truck drivers who are trans, who are delivering goods across the country, shine the light on police officers who are trans, who are protecting their communities. Shine the light on trans doctors who are helping save lives in emergency rooms across this country. Shine light on the positive things that the people in the trans community are providing folks, because there are so many examples of those that just don't get seen because they spend all of their time focusing on somebody who has done something wrong. They love to point to, a trans person who commits a crime, and then, we cannot allow trans people in any positions of authority because they do this. It's like, well, that's one person, that's a singular event, and that's that person's. I mean, I don't go around saying that we need to lock all cis men up because look at Ted Bundy. Look at the number of women he killed. All men are like that. We can't have men in society. And that's what they're doing with trans folks. They're taking these outlying examples and saying, all trans people are this. Well, not all trans people are crooks. Are there some? Yeah, because we're a cross section of everybody in America. So we've got to continue to focus on the brightness. We got to continue to focus on the positive things. And that's what I try to do. I've done some podcasts myself, working with some things, and I've tried to find, some trans people to put on there to show the good things that are going on in relationship with them. It's really hard to live in two states, be involved in all these organizations that I'm involved in, because I'm also involved in what is the former AIDS Project Los Angeles, which is now APLA Health. I've been on the board of directors there for 8 years, and I was scheduled to become chair of the board in June of this year. But because of everything that's going on, I asked our current chair if he would stay on for an additional year, because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to serve fully in that capacity based on how fast events are changing in this country. And I didn't want to put my organization that I truly love, that I have helped to build up from a $25 million healthcare company to a $110 million healthcare company, providing healthcare to thousands of folks who live below the poverty line in Los Angeles, focusing on providing health, dental, mental health care to the LGBTQ plus community, giving them resources to be able to find housing, giving them resources to get food. I don't want that organization to suffer because the green Cheeto head in DC doesn't like trans people, and who knows what he's going to do next. So unfortunately, at times we actually have to realize that negative stuff is out there. And I hate how it affects people's lives, because this is something I've been training to do for 8 years, and I am ready to do that. But because of these forces of negativity, I'm not able to share that light fully at this point. I'm hoping that next year I do take over, and that things are legal decisions have been made, and we get back to some semblance of having a normal government. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. But I am trying to stay positive as much as I can. I'm trying to share that positivity. I'm still going to the same places that I've been to. I still go and see, drag shows and things like that. Trying to give that back to the community. I try to speak to as many groups as I can to share that positivity. And we've got to stay that way, because the best defense we have to their negativity is our positivity, because we are so incredibly positive. We do so many incredible things. And to even be able to transition, you have to be one of the strongest suckers in the world, because you know what you're going into when you transition. You know that you're facing potential hate. You know you're facing potential rejection. And yet, because you know who you are, it's all worth it. And to show that and to share that and to let people know that we are just, for the most part, normal folks, that we have our little bit of strange folks, and y'all have your strange number of strange folks. And can't we just all get along? I hate to sound like Rodney King from the 90s. Can't we just all get along? But we really, it's recognizing that people have differences and not being afraid of those differences. And that's why they want to attack DEI, because that is all about allowing people to see the differences and move away from those biases and stereotypes and negative connotations that we have in relationship to certain things, so that we can all see each other as being human and being interrelated, and all of us having unique and inherent self-worth that is worth being respected and not being targeted. So I try. I don't know if I get through. I mean, I have changed a lot of minds. I do know when I have one-on-one interactions with folks, they see that maybe some of their preconceived notions about trans folks are not accurate. And I'm just hopeful that you getting these messages out, me sharing these messages, and other folks getting out and doing the messaging, that we can make a difference, and eventually we'll look back on this period of time as the aberration that it truly is, and that we need to celebrate our strengths, our commonalities, and stop fighting about these little issues of differences that in the end don't really matter. Whether I live my life and have as a female and have an F on my driver's license, that is not a big issue in the scheme of the world, when you have medical pandemics that are raging, when you have people going hungry, when you have people who are going to be out of work, when you have all these other issues. Why don't we let us who are still a part of the world have our jobs, have our ability to live as ourselves, and start working on solving those issues, instead of whether or not I get access to healthcare, because that is not a big issue.
Casey, thank you so much for your knowledge, for your expertise, for your wisdom, for your active position, for your help for our community. You're incredibly inspiring woman, and I'm so proud to be in the same community with you. I still have a lot of questions on my tablet and topics that we haven't talked about. And
We can do this again.
I really hope we will meet the second time. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story.
And thank you for doing this, because it's having people that have a voice, that have a platform, who can use, the goodwill that they develop to help spread the message that we need to have. And so thank you. And you're an inspiration for sharing your journey also, because it's by sharing our experiences, sharing our journeys, that we help normalize it in the minds of folks who don't necessarily understand what it is that happens and what we go through. So thank you, and hopefully we can fight this, and we will be able to make a difference, and all be able to get along.